Having been nominated for several awards such as the European 40 Under 40 Design Award, the Zine's Emerging Architect of the Year, and some others, Julius Taminiau is an architect with holistic approach and expertise in craftsmanship, detailing, and social engagement. In design, he always tries to filter complexity into the pure and the essentials, stripping everything down to what really improves people's lives and the environment, both physically and psychologically. Julius's multidisciplinary interest makes him look for connection with the art, music, philosophy, and nature, all to create a richer, layered, and deeply connected architecture. That being said, we invited Julius today to converse with us about exploring the link between architecture, music, and nature. So really can't wait to hear it. And thanks so much for coming, Julius.
Thanks for inviting me. I feel very honored. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this interview.
Oh, no, so good to finally see you. It's been long in coming. So why don't we start with you telling us about your background and also about the studio?
Well, I guess it all started with music. Music played an important role in my life. It started by playing the violin and later on performing as a DJ next to organizing cutting edge parties. Combining music and art. But eventually I chose architecture and graduated in 2011 at the Technical University of Delft in the aftermath of the credit crunch. So there basically was no work in the Netherlands, and yeah, I had to move to somewhere else, so I moved to London and worked for Carl Turner Architects for 3 years. It was a lot of fun, learned a lot, gained lots of experience. And after 3 years, I went back to Amsterdam to start a family. But I stayed working part-time for Carl Turner and the rest of the time on small projects, which I did for myself. And then quickly I got 3 big commissions: Startup Village, Tatami House, and the Potato Shed. And so I could start my own office. Tatami House was finished in 2016 and is also my family home, but it's also our office space. If you want to know more about that, you can search in YouTube for Houseboat Julius, and you will find a video made by Kirsten Dirksen, if you're interested. In 2019, we were honored to be selected for the Wallpaper Architect Directory. And the year after that, in 2020, we were longlisted by the Zine's Emerging Architect of the Year. And this year, we were also very lucky to be winning the European 40 Under 40 Design Award. So yeah, it's going pretty well.
Awesome. So how do you as a person or as a firm see architecture?
Well, I think architecture is a form of art. It should be something cherished, celebrated, and used for the right reasons. Definitely not as a commodity. I think architecture should inspire, invite, connect, be inclusive, and elevate. Yeah, I like to believe that good architecture can make people happy. So I want to give our projects a certain deeper connectedness by seeking beyond the architectural scope and to look for multicultural connections with nature, music, art, philosophy, and so on. And this is manifested in our minimal design approach, which emphasizes and accommodates the beauty and the relation with space, time, context, elements of weather, nature, natural materials, art, and also very importantly, the users.
Right. So what is it that you see in music that you think architecture should adopt?
Yeah, I once read a really interesting quote from Goethe, and he wrote, architecture is frozen music. But somehow for me, this didn't feel right. I don't think architecture is frozen or static. It's dynamic. You enter a building, you move through a building. The sunlight and shadows change constantly. But also even the building could be moving by simply opening a window or a door. So I believe architecture is not frozen music, architecture is music. Music is in the most broad definition, organized sound. And I believe that architecture is in that same broad sense, organized light. So yeah, music has also like architecture, proportion, composition, and structure. And I also think that architecture needs, like music, rhythm, melody, and soul. Yeah, music becomes real music when it touches you, and yeah, it needs to reach that inner level of consciousness. And I think, and I believe, architecture becomes real architecture when it touches you in that same sense. So I think the links between architecture and music are, yeah, very, very interesting.
So when we draw similarities between architecture and music, and you did say before that architecture, like music, needs rhythm, melody, and soul. What elements specifically in architecture are that are usually dynamic?
Yeah, also in a very broad definition, the sun is the center of our solar system. The earth is moving around the sun. Architecture is also moving around the sun. So it's always moving, basically. The sun is shining and casting shadows over architecture, and it's always in motion, the architecture. So architecture might seem static, but it's always dynamic and in play, always in a continuous flux in time and space. And therefore, I like to see, or I like the idea of architecture as an instrument played by the sun. Then, of course, within architecture, there are more dynamic elements, enlightened and in play or part of the play. So yeah, you have the natural elements, of course, but also the inhabitants, plants, animals, insects, and of course the people, the users, but also the building itself, like windows, doors, louvers, and so on.
So do you think there's a time element in architecture? Meaning, does it ever perform at a certain time? Or on the contrary, it should be performing all day and all year long?
Yeah, I think architecture and its surroundings, either nature or cities, are a bit like an orchestra. I like that yeah, metaphor. Some buildings are solo violists. They need to perform and carry the play. And the solo violists are followed and backed up by a larger, more modest background group. So not every building should be outstanding or shouting, in my opinion. Together they should be outstanding. So it's about the togetherness, and perform all year long and celebrate the 4 seasons, or the quattro stagioni, to stay in musical terms. Very rarely the buildings all together are outstanding and balanced, and form the perfect ensemble, and then you get the Miles Davis quintet. In another sense, architecture performs best in certain conditions. For example, when the sun is shining, architecture can be extra beautiful. You see the play of light, bright colors, and so on. Or whenever there is snow, the architecture is more outstanding in a white background. These are, amongst others, the piano keys to play with, in my opinion.
Is this why sometimes architecture has really dynamic meanings and interpretations? Like sometimes different people would feel differently in a certain space?
Yeah, I think it's fundamental to think about how art or the architecture is being perceived. So as an architect, I think it's really important to understand the universal values. The audience needs to be able to relate to the art or architecture. I think it's therefore also really important to make architecture open for different uses or interpretations. And therefore, I like ambiguity for that reason. Yeah, one can continuously fantasize and reflect about the art. And that's really interesting to me.
How can we draw a relation also with natural materials and also with the natural or analog music?
Yeah, well, the human or natural touch makes something beautiful, I believe. For example, an analog drum beat is much nicer than a digital drum beat, since a human always slightly hits the drum in a different way or a little bit out of pace. That makes it nice. The human drummer can even put a melody in the rhythm. The difference is even more clear between hearing a human violist and hearing a synthesizer violin. You know, that can sound really horrible. So natural materials have this same quality. They are never straight or 100% flawless, and therefore much more rich.
So if architecture is more about creating spaces that respond to these dynamic elements, do you think that it is rather a passive or reactive field than it is active?
Well, I think architecture is seen too much as a static thing. Of course, in a sense, it's static, but for me, the dynamic and activeness is much more interesting. Architecture is actively designed. It needs to inspire, invite, connect, and elevate. These are all active elements. And I think it should be designed with this active modus in mind. Next to that, architecture has like an organism, a birth and a death, or like a song, an intro and an outro. The life of a building is sometimes even shorter than the life of a human being. So I also really like to think about ruins, and that architecture should also ruin nicely or could be transformed, reused, or decay nicely in nature when demolished. It's also really important, I think, especially these days. So yeah, I really love the room painting John Soane commissioned when he was designing the Bank of England. It was a long time ago. And he thought from the beginning of the design how the building would ruin nicely, and yeah, that's super interesting to me.
I see. So last but not least, how can staying and being close to nature, maybe through material selections or sustainable construction, actually enrich one's life?
Yeah, well, music enriches people's lives. I think everybody would agree with that. In that sense, I believe architecture should inspire people's lives as well. I don't think people feel enriched if they see a piece of plastic or aluminium. But when you take a piece of timber and make timber architecture, it feels warm. Acoustically, it's nice to the ears. It smells nice. It moderates humidity, which means a more healthy indoor climate. And yeah, you simply feel more relaxed. And yeah, if you combine this with plants inside and outside, views to nature, protection or exposition to the elements, then you get a very enriching architecture.
Perfect. Everyone must want that, no? But we must thank you for highlighting just how we can draw inspiration from anywhere, from music, from nature, from other forms of art, and it will only enhance our understanding towards architecture and other subjects really. But really glad to see how it blends so nicely and so beautifully with the buildings you created and the act of building itself. So thank you so much for your time today, and thanks for sharing.
Thank you so much as well, Karina. It was lovely chatting with you and to talk about these issues.
It's my pleasure.
Bye-bye.